Hello, 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 dear listeners, and welcome to the first Graduate Gamer podcast, the show where I sit down and have a good old chinwag with people from all over the hobby sphere. I'm your host, Michael, and today I am joined by my first ever guest, physics boffin, Dr. Simon Clark. Hi, Simon. Welcome to the show.
I've never been described as a physics boffin before, but I like that. It's a very underused
Oh,
word.
well, you do seem like a very intelligent man, so I felt it was an apt
See,
description.
whenever you say boffin, I always think of is it Dr. Peabody from the Muppets? It's Peabody and Beaker who are like the two generic scientists
Yeah.
that they always go for. But like, yeah, just I think boffin is just a great word. I'll gladly accept that label. Yeah, I've been known to do the brain things, though I definitely question why anybody ever gave me funding at points. Because yeah, I don't know. It's one of those weird things where like I suppose it is imposter syndrome, where just like you feel like
Yeah.
you're never going to live up to that expectation of being a smart person all the time, because funnily enough, even the smartest people in the world make stupid mistakes, and I'm not even close to being the smartest person in the world. So like, but whenever I make a stupid mistake or do something stupid, I'm just like, oh god, people think you're smart. Like, I'm a boffin apparently. And yeah,
Well, I mean, shows we're all human at the end of the day.
exactly, yes, very much. So no, thank you for inviting me. This is exciting.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure to have you on. So before we start, for the people out there who don't know who you are, why don't you let them know what you do and where they can find you?
So I am a content creator is probably the best way of putting it, because I make YouTube videos as my main thing. I do a variety of things, including video blogs. Science videos is sort of the main thing that I'm doing at the moment. There are a few different projects that I'm juggling at any given time, mostly focused around physics and more specifically climate, because in my previous existence I was a PhD student in atmospheric physics, and when I graduated I turned full-time content creation. So that sort of bled over, and there was a very much an overlap. The reason that I was able to go from being a PhD into being a content creator is because I had a successful YouTube channel which grew and grew over my studies, and I basically decided to give it a go. So I wasn't expecting to be successful, but I thought I'd regret not trying after graduation. And here I am. So I do that mostly, and then I also do live streams on Twitch. So I do. They're kind of all over the place. As during term time, what I do is an educational stream on Wednesdays, and then a more traditional stream playing normally Kerbal Space Program on the weekend. In my educational streams, I have been trying a format where I go through past exam papers. So that could be GCSE or A Level or Olympiad or Maths Challenge, what have you, and teach the concepts that are contained within the questions, and sort of using the questions as examples to hang the teaching off of. No one else seems to be doing that on Twitch, but I think it's a perfect platform for educational content.
Oh no, yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Because the demographic who's already there it's largely young people, largely students, and they perceive it as a fun thing to watch. So why not use that kind of sneak under the radar and make them learn without them realizing it, and try and make it fun, like they're watching just a streamer chatting, but they just so happen to be chatting about various things.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much taking advantage of this new connected world that we have.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm actually funnily enough, what I was doing this afternoon was I was writing a chapter for a book that I was invited to take part in, which is about online communities of researchers and using social media to generate a community of researchers.
Okay.
And yeah, like talking about mostly YouTube, but then I was just writing actually about ephemeral content like Twitch, and how that is the kind of the future trajectory, I think, of, well, it's a future battleground for educators to try and to try and capitalize. So that's why I'm doing it, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to do, and I also really enjoy doing it. So I do that, and then I also do a podcast, the WikiCast, which is about random Wikipedia articles every week. My ex-housemate and still friend. Whenever I say ex-housemate, it sounds like he's not my friend anymore. My still current friend, Dan, which is just a bunch of nonsense, really. And then, I mean, that's mostly it, really. And then I do a few other things, like I do some work on commission for people. I've done some presenting for the BBC. I've done some writing here and there. And Yeah, so when I say content creator, I'm not just trying to be elusive. It's probably the most accurate description for what I do. It's the thing.
Yeah, that's a wide portfolio.
Yeah, it's pretty out there, huh?
Yeah, for sure. So, let's get into the point of this podcast, hobby.
Oh,
So, if I were to come into your house right now, what would I find on your paint table? What would I find in your gaming library? Yeah, tell me about what you play.
so my the table which I do everything on really, which is our dining room table. I just had to clear away because my girlfriend is coming back. She didn't leave me. I mean, she was like out of the country for a bit. It sounds really bad. So what I was just doing was I just assembled a whole bunch of Tyranid warriors. So I am about halfway, I'd guess, maybe a little under halfway into putting together 1,000 points of Tyranids. And I've been using them as a kill team, which has been the main thing that I've been playing, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit more.
Yes.
That's been my main system recently. So I built a whole bunch of warriors, and I also have on my painting desk some Venom Thropes, which to assemble, I have some Venom Thropes, some more Hormagaunts, and I think another set of warriors, which I think should be my last set, because I went to this amazing place in London called the Bad Moon Cafe, which if any listeners are from London should absolutely go, because it's basically a little bit like a miniature Warhammer world, and there's loads of different tables to play, and you can rent a table for like really cheaply. And they also have a cafe, and you can get drinks and things like that. And then they have the Wall of Financial Regret, with like basically every kit from Games Workshop there, and it's at about a 10 to 15% discount.
It's not bad for London.
Yeah, so I was like, well, I know I was going to buy these things anyway, so I'm just going to spend like 60 quid on plastic models today. So yeah, they're on my table, and then out at the moment, I think the only stuff I have out was stuff that I couldn't fit in my carry case when I last went somewhere. So I have my Space Marines from when I was originally in the hobby about 10 years ago, and I was recently came back about a year ago. My original Space Marine chapter's worth of a Razorback, Vindicator, and a Land Speeder, and they got pride of place on my windowsill at the moment, purely because they couldn't fit in the case, but now I'm just quite fond of seeing them. So yeah, I mean, have you always stayed in the hobby? Are you one of these people like me that sort of wandered away for a bit?
It's interesting. So I kind of first became aware of the hobby when I was quite young, living over in the Isle of Man. And basically what happened was one of my friends' parents got him into it through whatever means. I'm not too sure, because there weren't actually any retailers outside of one shop in the main town that did anything hobby related outside of the usual Hornby, Airfix, etc. So he mentioned it to me, and when I next went over to the UK, I stepped into my first ever Games Workshop. And now I'm going to show how young I am here. This was when the starter set used to be Space Marines versus Tyranids, which was maybe 4th edition, I want to say.
Oh, okay. So that was that was the Battle from a Crag. I remember that coming out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And played an intro game, absolutely loved it. Though didn't buy any models, which was a miracle. But then I kind of was aware of the hobby, and I used to look in the shop at the models, and I was like, oh, I saw them as robots. I didn't know they were Tau back then, and I was like, oh, they look really cool. They must be really good. Unfortunately not. But I actually didn't start getting properly into the hobby until I moved over to England in around year 7 of secondary school, where I started off with, I mean, as every boy starts off, the boys in blue.
Yes,
Ultramarines.
Everybody starts with a Space Marine chapter, basically. Like, I think I know like 2 people in my entire time in the hobby that haven't started off with some Space Marines. Because
they're very much the poster boys.
Well, I mean, like they've been in most of the starter sets, because that's why I had to think for a second about the Nids versus Marines. Because I think when I first went in, I mean, I started with Games Workshop with the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game. So which must have been about 2003, I think, was when I started.
Wow.
And because I can remember the very first White Dwarf I had was the one after the Return of the King game launched, so which I believe was White Dwarf 289, which properly dates me. And yeah, when I first went into Games Workshop, I think it would have been third edition 40k, and I'm pretty sure the thing that was out on the table. It's kind of funny how these things are seared into your memory. The thing that was on the table was the Tomb Kings. Had just been released.
Oh,
Rip in peace. Well, rip in peace both the Tomb
yes,
Kings and Warhammer Fantasy. But see, I never
yes.
played Fantasy, so I don't really have that acute sense of loss. Um,
I only played it for. I think I got into it properly during the end times actually.
hmm.
So again, I'm very much so like, I was like, oh, okay, well, that was a lot of fun. Shame it's gone. But yeah, I don't have also that attachment. I'm not, I don't hold the resent that a lot of players seem to have towards GW for crudely killing off what was one of their more popular games at the
I
time.
mean, it's a I like a well, neither of us have skin in this game, but
Yeah,
I feel like it was a very brave move from Games Workshop, which
same.
seems to have actually paid off. I mean,
I don't think it paid off initially because I know a wide sphere of people that wouldn't touch Sigmar during first edition
yeah,
because first edition was infamously very
ruleless.
lenient with what you
Yeah,
could take. But oh yeah, second edition it seems to have only grown more and more in popularity.
yeah, and I think I mean there are a variety of things that Games Workshop has done, very smart things recently, and I think
Yes.
one of the things was Age of Sigmar. I think the other thing was the development of Shadespire and Kill Team
Yes.
actually. Like this whole smaller version of the games, which is just so much easier to get into. Because for someone like me, who was in the hobby and then basically stopped when I went to university, and then left it for about 6-7 years, I guess. Actually, maybe a little bit more than that. And eventually came back. The thing that made me realize I could get back into it was, oh, well, if I play Kill Team, I actually only need like 10
Yeah.
models.
Yeah.
And and the same thing for Sigmar. They have Shadespire for the same reason.
Yeah. Shadespire and obviously now Warcry with select factions that you can just pick up a box or two boxes of models and
And away you go.
that's it. That's
Yeah,
your force.
yeah. The sort of the return of the boxed game is interesting because I think that was before I started. I think with a lot more of the specialist games, so things like Necromunda and BFG and
Yeah.
these things. They were designed to be just games in a box, and I think the company kind of got away from that a little bit, and it became this big sprawling thing, and you need to put all these different things together, and it just made it very intimidating for outsiders. I remember as a kid, like reading White Dwarf and just being like, "How the hell do I build an army? Like, what am I supposed to pick?" Whereas now, there's the start collecting box sets, the fact that you have things like
Yeah.
Dark Imperium, or I don't know, it's the stuff like Shadespire, or the Kill Team starter sets. Like it's just so much more user friendly than it used to be.
It really is.
It's
Yeah.
it's almost like kind of watch. It's almost like actually having been in the hobby, taking a break, coming back, and the hobby being totally different both times. It's a bit like Warhammer Fantasy versus Age of Sigmar. Like
Yeah.
the experience of interacting with GW, and like something the end times apparently happened in the middle of with the company, which I missed, and now everything's changed. But so sorry, I interrupted you. You went in fourth ed 40k.
Yes. Yeah. Started with the Boys in Blue because Assault on Black Reach was my start set, and as most people know, the orcs don't really stand a chance in that box set. I mean, maybe if you get lucky with your Death Copters, but it felt very weighted against them.
Hmm.
And yeah, I played the Boys in Blue for a long old while. Funnily enough, I never actually ventured into going for Calgar. I actually preferred Kato
Oh,
Sigarius,
it is
yeah,
I.
esteemed champion. um, but then I I don't remember where I dipped out to, but I've always played a very wide array of armies. So I play Tyranids. I think they may have been the next one that I branched into because I saw them. I was aware of the Alien movies. I think by that point I was also aware of StarCraft, and I was just like, well, these are just
Zerg.
your sci-fi aliens. They're awesome.
Hmm.
And this was also back when I believe they were relatively strong within the meta. Like not overpowered, but they could very much hold their own.
Hmm.
Um, but then yeah, I mean, I've played Tau, I've played Necrons. Um, I like to pretend I never played Ultramarines. The main thing.
It's like
So,
a
I mean,
secret
everyone's
shame.
got to start somewhere.
It's like a
But
secret shame
yeah,
in the hobby if you played Ultramarines. It's a bit like Tau are now. Like Tau players are just like so maligned.
I have a friend. He back when this edition came out, obviously everyone was promised a new book,
Hmm.
and the Tau Codex was quite a big release, and he was very disappointed with the Tau release because the way they essentially changed their shooting, so you rely on marker lights a lot more than you used to.
Hmm.
And then the Necron book came out, and the Necron's My Will Be Done ability is substantially better than the Tau's once per game or twice per game, depending upon your commander ability. And he promptly sold the Tau Force. Safe to say. Uh,
I can't. I mean, I know that some people do this. They're like just sell a whole army, but like,
yeah,
and you can turn a profit on it if you've painted them up well. But I just have too much of a personal attachment to just be like, oh, my forces rules suck in this edition. I'm I'm just gonna sell them. Like, I can't deal with this.
yeah.
Like, I can't imagine there's no way that GW could nerf Tyranids badly enough that right when I finished getting like 2,000 points of Nids together, and admittedly I've made it harder for myself because I'm going very gaunt heavy, so I need a lot of boxes, a lot of models. But like to get to that point, there's nothing they could do that would make me just like go, yeah, useless, get rid of them. I'm going to collect Custodes instead. Have like 20 models and I'm done. Actually, that's probably like 5,000 points. But yeah, I suppose it's different mentalities, right? It's approaching the hobby for different reasons. Like some people do it for the collecting, and some people do it for the gaming side of things.
Yeah, for sure.
So how long were you away from the hobby for?
It was only a couple of years, really. I mean, so I've never really properly stepped away from hobby itself. I'm someone who plays a lot of the smaller companies' games as well. So as like readers of my blog will know, I play quite a few Mantic game products. Some that I'm currently working on. I've got Wild West Exodus. I've got the Star Wars Legion stuff that I'm eagerly anticipating.
I've heard good things about
with the
that.
new Clone Wars releases. Yeah, it seems like an alright game. It's very much, I'm a bigger fan of the Clone Wars. So the minute they were like Clone Wars is coming, I was like, okay, time to properly invest in this game.
Yeah.
And obviously there's the Marvel miniature game that's just been announced that I believe's out fourth quarter of this year.
Oh, that's news.
So I'm interested to see what that holds.
I did not.
Yes. So Gen Con was not too long ago. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically a big American convention. It's one of the biggest in America, I believe,
right,
and possibly even the world. And it's where a lot of companies like to do their here's our big announcement for the year. And yeah, so both the Marvel series, obviously now they've kind of wrapped up this phase of films.
Yeah.
And they're going to be bringing new actors or comic book storylines, etc.
Mm.
They have sold the rights basically to a miniature game for it. So, and I believe the models are going to be modeled off the actors and actresses.
Oh, fun!
And like the on-screen adaptations. But they have also shown they're going to be throwing in some like of the comic book characters that we're yet to see in film.
Oh, cool.
And also alongside that, it's also getting a new living card game as well. So
that's tempting.
It's a fun time to be a Marvel fan.
The one that I was told, because I was talking to Tom and Ben from the Oxcast, and they've been playing a lot of the Game of Thrones miniatures game.
Yeah, Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, which is apparently really good. Very fast paced was their ultra quick review. I've not played any of it myself, but they were certainly impressed, and they've played a ton of different games. I know. Well, and actually Ben plays the other one, which I'd really like to try, which is Star Wars Armada. I've always liked the idea of ship-to-ship combat on miniatures games. Like, I would have loved to have played Battlefleet Gothic when it was a miniatures game, and I know you can obviously still play it. It's not like it expired. It's just impossible to get your hands on the miniatures these days.
Well, I mean, you could go the Tomb King route and pay £100 for a squad of 3.
Yeah.
If you've got that budget.
True. Yeah. I mean, you could do what my friend did, which was when he wanted to make a Tyranid fleet, he just basically lumped a bunch of green stuff together, stuck a few tentacles in it, and just declared what each ship was. That seems to do the trick. But I mean, like, yeah, that and I did actually play. I think it was Games Day 2006. I want to say I played some Aeronautica Imperialis.
Yes,
which is
the game that I I'm assuming you're aware it's coming back out.
Yes, I
very
heard
soon?
that it was coming back out,
Yeah.
which I'd be interested because I know that the main one that people would play is X-wing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, between X-wing and Armada, that's like the two ends of ship-to-ship combat scale. I'd really like to play
sure.
both. I'd really like to give it a go. It's just a question of finding somebody to play with, really. Like, I'm not part of where I live. There's not really anywhere around me with an active kind of gaming scene. So you want to be able to rock up to someone and be like, "Hey guys, do you want to try something new? I painted up a bunch of Star Destroyers." Because like a lot of what I consume for the hobby is, or my interactions with the hobby are either from a group chat which I'm in, which was a friend of mine got married, and his stag do. We did 2 stag do's. One was the normal one, we went to like a theme park or something, and then the cool one was when me and him and a bunch of his friends that used to play the hobby with all went to Warhammer World in Nottingham, and we did like a weekend there.
Okay.
And this WhatsApp that was originally designed to sort of just organize this weekend has just turned into this 24/7 40k meme central way of interacting with the hobby. So it's either that, or I watch a great deal of tabletop tactics on YouTube, which is amazing. I absolutely love it. And I actually, so I don't. Do you watch tabletop tactics?
I hadn't actually heard of them. Well, yeah, I had heard of them, but I don't actually watch any other stuff. It's odd. I play all these games, but when it comes to actually consuming content, I only really watch mini wargaming.
Oh yeah,
And obviously they only do Warhammer Games Workshop products even. And I watch like Beasts of War, or as they're now called, On the Tabletop, for kind of the news and here's what's coming out. But I don't actually watch any content for any of the other games I play for some reason.
Well, I mean, I suppose from a content creator's perspective, a lot of these, especially if it's not GW, the audience is just really quite small. Like the ability to like make a living off of doing that, and obviously that's not why a lot of these people do it. A lot of these people do it in their spare time because they're passionate about it, and that's why everybody starts. That's the only reason really you should ever consider being a content creator, is because you're just passionate about something and you want to share it. People who go into it, I don't want to say cynically, but the people who go into it basically trying to make a career out of it from the get-go are immediately flagged up in the audience's mind, because people's bullshit detectors are very highly tuned.
Yes. So it's very much becoming very easy to pick that sort of stuff out these days.
Yeah. But from a content creation perspective, I just feel like the audience for these things. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'd be interested to get feedback on whether I'm wrong on this. But for games that aren't Games Workshop, just seem to be so limited.
Content creation. You're very much right. There isn't as much content out there because Games Workshop is the well-known company in the industry. They are very much at a stage where they're kind of becoming very international with the whole Warhammer's Hero series that they have over in Japan, and obviously these big conventions over in America. So it can be very hard to kind of get into the limelight as a company.
Yeah, when it's such a monopoly.
As a content producer. Yeah. I mean, they're certainly on the rise. Like Warlord Games. So there are kind of 3 miniature companies based in England, and they are, funnily enough, all around Nottingham. And like I know Nottingham has an area that used to kind of be known as, this was the area where the people that work at Games Workshop and these other companies all live. So it's quite an interesting gaming community over there. But so Warlord Games is the 2nd largest UK model company, I believe, and they're very much the historical company. So they do a lot of Blood Red Skies is one of their big products, which is World War II air combat, and they do a lot of historical games. I believe they have Conflict 47, which kind of touches on the future. It's I believe an alternate timeline to World War II.
Oh, okay.
Which it's a game that like I look at and I'm like, those are some pretty models. But I'm not a historical kind of gamer, unfortunately.
Yeah. I was actually talking to people because I was at the Oxcast convention a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to Digby and Remy Down Under, about Bolt Action, which apparently is a World War II game, which is the key thing that they...
that's Warlord as well.
That's Warlord as well, okay. Because the key thing that they stressed was it was really fun to play, and it was substantially cheaper than Games Workshop. A
lot of people are cheaper than Games Workshop. You start to find when you step out of the Games Workshop bubble, you very much go, hang on a minute, why am I paying, £85 for a Keeper of Secrets when I can pay £85 and get an entire army for this game?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, and it's the kind of thing where like I feel like the loyalty that I have towards Games Workshop at this point, because it's basically a cult, is what I've realized. It's like old school Catholicism, as in like you're either in or you're out, because the people who are really in the hobby are spending so much money on plastic crack, basically. And then also reading the books, often playing the video games. They'll often be watching or listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos about it. It's like an all or nothing type thing. And it's almost like when people say that they want to move away from having an iPhone or something, like going from iPhone to Android. That transition away is just so difficult because Apple has so many hooks in you. And Games Workshop has got so many hooks in me that it's going to take a hell of a lot to drag me out of the hobby, I think. But, obviously it's not mutually exclusive. Like, you can continue with all the stuff at Games Workshop that you're currently doing and then buy, I don't know, some bolt action figures and perhaps then have, like, a Road to Damascus moment. But, it does feel like kind of an all or nothing. And it is very tribal, is the impression I get.
It can be, yeah. I know people who are kind of liken it, and this may just be, my experience. I liken it a bit to the card gaming communities that I've come across.
Mm-hmm.
So back in my local hobby store where I reside away from university, there's Magic is obviously the big one because Magic is probably the biggest card game and the most well-known card game.
Yeah.
But I know people who also do wargaming, who play other card gamings, who point blank refuse to associate with Magic players.
Really?
Just because of they've come from it and then when they left they had a bad experience, or when they've tried to get into it they've had such a bad experience, because I know it's certainly an issue that we're also having in our society for all of our card gaming, wargaming, roleplay and stuff, where people at the start of the year during freshers come along to our card gaming events, but all people play a Magic the Gathering, and they sit down and they're like, okay, I'm going to learn how to play this game, and the people that have been playing for 10 plus years kill them within 3-4 turns.
Yeah.
Using their really strong deck, and that builds quite a kind of resentment and kind of this game isn't fun. I don't want to play this game. Why do I want to play this game?
Yeah, yeah.
And it can be like that with miniature wargame communities where people go, oh, you play Games Workshop products. Why would you play them? Why would you feed into their corporate machine? Because I know there's a dedicated group of people that kind of aren't a fan of Games Workshop from things that they've done during, well, as you aptly said earlier, during kind of the dark times. A lot of people hold a lot of resentment towards Games Workshop just because of what they did.
It definitely felt like, certainly when I left the hobby, which wasn't because of these events. It was basically just because I went to uni and I didn't have time. And actually, funnily enough, I also thought that there was no one to play with. It turns out there were so many people in my college who played Warhammer, but we all kept it secret from each other because we all thought it was embarrassing. And literally, there were like a dozen of us.
Yeah, that's something that actually got touched on at a panel in Gen Con, where they were giving a talk kind of about how whilst wargaming, card gaming, and all these nerd communities, as it were, are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we are still very much the minority. And you go back 10 years back to when you were still playing the hobby, if it was kind of publicly known during that time, oh, I play Dungeons & Dragons, I play with models in my spare time, you would actually get you'd face a lot of discrimination.
Yeah.
There are lots of instances where people, oh, you play Dungeons & Dragons, you're not going to get a promotion, or, people will stop socializing with you because you're part of, the whole cult aspect that people used to perceive it as.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's become mainstream, really, and I think there's a few reasons for that. I actually think that Stranger Things had quite a bit to do with D&D, in particular.
It certainly helped, I can imagine. That and a critical role, I'd imagine. I was also going to say Community, because Community has had 2, maybe 3 now episodes exclusively about Dungeons and Dragons. It's just much more in the mainstream than it ever was before, I think. But I think the other thing is that the rise of internet culture, and particularly things like having subreddits and discords for particular hobbies and interests, I mean, it's just easier for people to find other like-minded people. Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think there's that strength in numbers kind of attitude that people are a bit more brazen about it when they know that there are lots of people who share in this hobby, that they're not weird for doing it. Like, they don't feel ashamed because they know that there are thousands of people on the internet who do exactly the same thing. Certainly I now don't feel any shame at all about it. I think originally when I sort of came out, as it were, on social media about being a Games Workshop nerd, like, I think I probably did feel a certain degree of I guess embarrassment, but now I just own it. I'm like, I am of the opinion that it is considered uncool to be passionate about something, and that could be anything. And that's, I think, a reason why a lot of kids drop out of taking part in hobbies when they get to be teenagers. Like, they'll do it when they're younger, then when they become teenagers, it's like not cool, so they don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the same with young adults. But now, I think there's a growing number of people who are like, yeah, I like this thing. I don't care that it's uncool. I'm just gonna carry on doing it. And I feel like the more people that do that, the less uncool it will be to be passionate about anything.
Oh, for sure. I think it's very much the one. It's kind of like the way your mentality changes as you get older. You start to stop caring about what other people think of you. You're like, yes, so what? You're kind of like, I'm no longer in secondary school. I don't deserve to get harassed for liking what I like, or feeling how I feel, etc. And very much as a whole, as it becomes more and more mainstream, people kind of get used to seeing it, and it very much stops becoming you play with models in your spare time, you suck. And it becomes much more, oh, cool, I play football in my spare time. Two different hobbies, but fair enough.
Yeah. It's, I mean, society changes, right? And it is, it has long been swinging in the more tolerant, more liberal kind of direction. And I just hope that swing doesn't then go back, and that we're living at kind of like peak cool to be nerdy times. And I know at the end of the day, we were just talking about Marvel, like the biggest cinematic the biggest cinematic events of each of the past few years has been a Marvel movie coming out. Imagine telling someone that 20 years ago. They never would have believed it.
Yeah. I mean, back when a time when Stan Lee declared bankruptcy.
Yeah. And, and I feel like I can't help but worry that what if we're at the zenith or the local maximum of this sort of sentiment, and then give it a couple of years and, maybe we're going to be going back underground and we're going to be hiding. I mean, I certainly don't plan on doing so, but it's difficult to. Yeah. It's something that you care about, so it's difficult to not worry about it, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Actually, you were mentioning Marvel just then. So I believe recently you released something that a lot of Marvel fans and certainly science fans might actually find quite interesting on your YouTube channel.
Yes, so I was, funnily enough, I was just looking at the analytics whilst we were talking, because that's what you do in your YouTuber. You relentlessly check your analytics. So I released a video which was produced by myself and a friend of mine, Dr. Hannah Wakeford, who is a planetary scientist who was at NASA and the space. I think as of the moment, she's still at the Space Telescope Science Institute. She's actually moving back to the UK, which I'm very happy about because it means I can make more content with her, about all the planets in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU. So there are, I think by our count, there are 28 planets, moons, and other astronomical objects. And we go through and apply the principles of planetary physics and atmospheric physics to them, as well as comparing them to observations. So observed exoplanets, also observations within the solar system, and paleoclimate, the Earth's paleoclimate. And we basically assess which ones of them could really exist. And it's a very interesting... it's been interesting going through the comments on it, actually, because it's sort of had a spurt of... Every YouTuber complains about the algorithm. It did feel like this one was a very damp squib to begin with, and the people, loads of subscribers didn't see it. And now it's in this upswing. I've been checking the comments, and a lot of people are sort of saying, yeah, but you didn't consider this, you didn't consider that. And I feel like I've actually pinned a comment now basically saying, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video isn't to get it right, really. The point of this video is it's science communication. It's getting the idea of hydrostatic equilibrium or the idea of an eclipse over to a general audience, using Marvel as like a touchstone. and because it's a vocabulary that people are familiar with, people know about Asgard, or people recognize Sakaar from Thor Ragnarok or what have you, and all this is, it's not trying to be a scientific paper or anything like that. It is just an hopefully entertaining way of getting this stuff across. So if people are interested in the MCU and they would like to learn a little bit more about how the planets and moons and asteroids that are shown could or could not really exist, then definitely check it out. It's and if you like it, there's also another one which we did, Hannah and I did, on the planets of Star Wars, which was much easier to do because there aren't 22 movies in the Star Wars cinematic universe.
Well, give it a couple of years and they might get there.
Oh yeah, true. Very true.
And they as you were mentioning earlier, it's the whole getting people to learn without realize they're learning, or perhaps even inspire them to go, okay, maybe this is interesting. Maybe I should look into this further, and then possibly lead to career paths or influence what they study at school.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of get more people into the sphere of science.
Well, that's really what I'm trying to do with basically anything that I upload that is even vaguely to do with science. It is to get... I'm not interested in getting facts across, really. A good science video should never be about what it says it's about. A good science video should always be trying to communicate methodologies and ideas. So the idea of a scientific methodology, the idea of, like I just said about hydrostatic equilibrium, about, why is it that planets are spherical? Rather than like having a series of facts that they can regurgitate, it's all about getting them interested in those processes. Because if someone finds a fact interesting, it's like, oh, that's cool, I'll tell my friends that. If they find a process, or the idea of a process interesting, that's something that makes them want to study it. And as we said before, like, it's trying to trick people into learning without realizing they're learning. If people come to a conclusion on their own that they like a subject because they found a certain number of things in it interesting, that is the most powerful way that you can get somebody interested in science. So you're not forcing them to do anything. It is entirely their own free will, that they are that they're walking into this cult of science. I've got to be careful not to oversell it as well. Like the idea of doing science university has its ups and downs, as I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Yes, I live with a housemate who does physics, and physics is by no means an easy course.
No,
it's very much a 9 to 5 every day, problem sheets all the time.
Yeah,
kind of. I mean, he seems to be learning a lot, which is good, and he seems to be enjoying it. But I don't think I could personally cope with that workload. I prefer a much more, I wouldn't say relaxed, but a lot less intensive approach to science. But that's the benefits of being a biologist, where I don't need to learn concepts that were thought up back in the early ADs.
Yeah, I mean, you have slightly different requirements, though. I mean, physicists generally don't have to worry about, for example, ethics. Obviously, they do come into the field. For example, the Manhattan Project is a very good example. But yeah, you have a slightly different set of requirements, whereas with physics, it is basically learning a bunch of methodologies. It's learning a bunch of derivations and relations between physical variables, and there's a lot of them. So there's a lot to learn. But it is, if you are good at learning one of those things, then it kind of transfers over. Whereas something like biology, and certainly when you go over into the humanities, so many different skill sets that you have to develop. For the same reason, I wouldn't really be. I don't think I'd be any good at doing a subject like, probably not even biology, really. Certainly not something like, I don't know, philosophy or theology, because it is so. There's so much going on. So don't worry. I feel like everyone at university looks at everybody else's course and think, oh God, thank God I'm not doing that. Everyone's in their own little bubble. They're not happy with. And I'm not going to say that everyone at university is happy with their subject, because there are definitely times when I wasn't happy with my subject. But certainly happier doing that than they would be doing other subjects. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, for sure. So actually, while we're on the topic of physics, I, in a way, set you a piece of homework.
Yes, you did.
So you mentioned earlier that obviously you currently play Tyranids and Kill Team.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, what Hive Fleet have you gone for?
What High Fleet? So I'm going for High Fleet Nostromo. So they are what I was told by Alex from the Battle Boys is known as alienids. So they're entirely xenomorph inspired. The anything that doesn't have synapse has had its eyes removed, so they look like just drones. So all of the Gaunts have had their eyes green stuffed over, so they just look a little bit more mindless. And then everything's black and blue and shiny, and then the highlight color, which I need to experiment with really before I do my Venom Thropes, is kind of basically the color of the flesh huggers. And if I get any rippers, which I would like to do, I think I'll do them as the I don't know what you'd actually call it, like the thing that births out of the body in Alien.
Like chest burster.
Chest burster, that's the one. Because you need to have a little bit of color interest in there.
So Tyranids, they're obviously quite well known in the lore for invading planets through very biological means. So in regards to your PhD in atmospheric physics, how would a Tyranid invasion kind of play out in real life? Like, what sort of effects, from what you know of the lore, would it have on a planet's atmosphere? And would you say the law is an accurate representation of how these processes would carry out?
So, I mean, a lot of the invasion, the sort of methodology that they use that gets described is really to do with spores. So you have sort of spores raining down from the sky, which then seed and create Tyranids. Now, that is basically that's the only thing that I can think where the atmosphere would be sort of relevant, other than they have flying creatures, and depending on the density of the atmosphere of the planet that they're invading, different flies are going to behave in different ways. In terms of the spores, it depends how they are deployed, how they are seeded, because if they were to drop them in from orbit, which does seem to be kind of what's depicted in a lot of the artwork, that you get these kind of big spores that get chucked down from space. Realistically, they are going to burn up in the atmosphere. But, let's just assume for the sake of argument that they're bioengineered, that they can withstand tremendous heat or whatever. If they are then deployed and sort of they spread their spores in the stratosphere, which every planet has a stratosphere, it's the layer in which the temperature above the bottom layer of the atmosphere, it's the layer in which the temperature starts increasing with altitude. And Earth has one. We've seen them on, I believe, every planet that we've probed that has an atmosphere. So Mars, for example, has a very well-known stratosphere. If they were to deploy spores in that layer, so a bit higher up in the atmosphere, then it wouldn't actually be tremendously effective, because all that would happen is they'd be blown all over the planet, but they wouldn't actually ever reach the surface. There's very little material transfer. There is along isotopes in the mid-latitudes, but very little transfer of material from the stratosphere into the troposphere, and it's something that is an active research problem. For example, ozone concentrations are highest in the stratosphere. In the Earth, that's what partly it is the reason why we have a stratosphere where we do, and we actually have two layers where the temperature increases with altitude. Ozone doesn't really play very well with human beings. It has negative health effects. So it's interesting to know how ozone will get from the stratosphere to troposphere, how much of it will move, and where it will move to once it leaves the stratosphere. So that's something which we've researched, and we know that there's a certain amount of interchange between the two layers. And something else that was learned from the atomic the nuclear tests was radioisotopes which entered into the stratosphere were then circulated around the world, and we could sort of detect where they fell out of the stratosphere, which then told us a lot about the circulation in the middle layers, when we didn't, for example, at that time have satellite measurements. So if they were to deploy it in the stratosphere, not very much would happen. If they were to deploy it in the troposphere, so the lowest layer of the atmosphere, then realistically they would be very well dispersed across the planet. The actual concentration of gases that comprise the atmosphere, so oxygen, nitrogen, but then also the more trace ones like carbon dioxide and methane, only vary in concentration over the Earth by something like 1%. It's actually really quite small variations in the gases that make up the atmosphere. That's just how well mixed everything is. So if you were to deploy a huge amount of spores, say, you were to drop something in from orbit onto the main continent, if you're invading Earth, you drop something into the middle of Asia, it would be distributed very widely, very quickly. That's then when it becomes more your territory with the biology as to how those spores would interact with the environment. But seeding at just a couple of places all over the world would be an effective way of effectively terraforming, if that's the purpose of the spores. That would change the environment on a global scale.
Okay.
Which is kind of terrifying when you sort of think about it, because it's almost like a reminiscence of War of the Worlds when you sort of think about how easily Earth could actually be conquered if an invading species was determined enough.
Yeah.
But NIDs are scary enough as they are. Like the idea that that they could reasonably actually take out the Earth with something like spores, like a gigantic fungal infestation just on a planetary scale, makes them even more terrifying. Which is, to be fair, why I play them. I chose the Hive Fleet and the army generally because I wanted to do psyops. I wanted to play an army that was scary and made your opponent make bad tactical decisions. So I've just taught myself into fearing my own army even more now. So thanks for that.
No problem. So, do you have favourite models from the Tyranids then?
So, I do really like the gross ones. And in the ones the army that I put together, it's warriors and hormagaunts because they look the most like xenomorphs. But I really like the Toxicrene, which is the massive gribbly tentacle monster.
Yes, that's exactly how I'd describe it as well.
Yeah,
I
looks...
have one myself.
Oh, do you?
It's a beautiful sculpt.
Yeah, it looks scary. I've been doing all of my models with a huge amount of acid dripping off of them, which is a glue gun that then you manipulate with like a pin so that you can get drool falling off of it. Yeah. Cover those tentacles in drool, make it look like they're snaking forwards towards the enemy. It's a horrifying thing. So I absolutely love that thing. I also really like the Tervigon, I want to say, the sculpt that's basically a big Carnifex that's birthing termagants. So it looks like a giant vagina on legs. Because obviously, like the xenomorphs in Alien, an awful lot of the imagery of Tyranids is basically around sexual violence. That's why they are so horrifying. The face hugger is like a reverse rape kind of thing.
I remember also similarly reading something, obviously I don't know how accurate it is, that one of the reasons why men are afraid of the xenomorph is the fact that it has a tail and can feasibly, rape them, as it were.
Yeah, it's taking a genre that is traditionally mostly watched, obviously not entirely, but mostly watched by men, and flipping a lot of the imagery of sexual violence on its head, which is a really effective way of scaring the shit out of your audience. And that's why something like the both of those models, both the Toxicrene and the Tervigon, I think are really gross and effective and scary looking because of precisely that factor. I mean, they're all great. I do have a soft spot for the really, really old warrior and screamer killer models, like that. I'm talking like kind of Rogue Trader era, where they just look goofy as all hell. Because I think it makes sense that they would be so different within the lore of the universe, because that's how the form of the Tyranids when they invaded the last galaxy and ate everybody, and now they've come across this galaxy, they need to change how they work. And so whilst they initially look really goofy and laughable, now they look terrifying because they're suited to eating humans, basically. So yeah, no, I like those. I mean, the models that have actually been really impressing me that I'd like to own, despite not collecting anything to do with them, is stuff from Age of Sigmar. I think a lot of the Sigmar models are incredible, particularly the Deepkin. There's some amazing sculpts. Is it Ideneth, the guy with the cloak made of water?
I believe so. Yeah.
He looks incredible.
They have some beautiful sculpts, especially like the giant turtles, and like you say, they're kind of the centerpiece of the army with the massive water cloak.
Same for the oh god, I don't know all the new names, but the wood elves.
Sylvaneth.
Sylvaneth. I nearly said Sylvaneth actually. Should have stuck to my guns. Yeah, a lot of their stuff, like, and as you say, it's basically actually most of the armies will have a centerpiece model that just looks sick. And it was and looks impossible to my eyes because the technology for the sculpting and the casting is just so advanced compared to what it was. And
it's definitely it's come a long way.
And I look at I look at a lot of these models that I'm never going to collect an army for, that I just really want to have one or two models here and there just to paint on the side.
Yeah.
That may just be because I'm used to now painting an army which is almost entirely black, with a lot of details that no one can even see unless you shine a really bright light on them. So I missed from starting out in Lord of the Rings. I think I miss earth tones. I miss painting things in natural colors. So something like the Sylvaneth really appeals. But yeah, God, there's some of the stuff that when you walk in now, it's just unbelievable. Particularly the organics, I suppose. Again, maybe that's the reason why I wanted to collect Tyranids. But the organic stuff is just amazing.
Yeah, they've certainly moved on a lot.
And
so you mentioned, obviously, you started with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Is it something you've considered going back into now that it's become a much larger game and it's a lot more supported and it's seeing frequent releases?
I mean, no, if I'm honest, not really, because I liked the Lord of the Rings when it was a small skirmish game, which is very much moved away from. When one of my favorite memories of being a kid was playing Battle Companies, which was the campaign. It was effectively like Lord of the Rings Kill Team, actually. You would level up your fighters, or Necromunders, probably a better analogy, actually. And they would get experience, and they would get vendettas against people, and all this kind of thing. And it was like 10 models per side at most. That was great. I didn't want to play Warhammer Fantasy because I didn't want to have these giant armies. I liked the smaller scale of it. Which, funnily enough, like I said earlier, is I'm playing a lot of Kill Team now. I think perhaps my brain just naturally suits, but my brain and my wallet naturally just suits having smaller numbers of miniatures. There's just something about it that tickles me. So no, seeing all the new stuff out of Lord of the Rings, just when I read it in White Dwarf, I'm just like, just not really interested, really.
The Battle Company's book actually has been re-released.
Oh, has it?
Not too long ago. So, but obviously it's a expansion rather than the main setting of the game. But that could be something worth looking into if you ever want to spend yet more money on Games Workshop.
I mean, you're definitely turning me more towards something like Bolt Action. Experiment with something that is a little bit cheaper, perhaps.
I can happily point you in all sorts of directions.
Oh, God.
And I'm sure, obviously, your friends that play the other games can as well.
Yeah. Although, admittedly, I think all of the guys that I play with, certainly in my WhatsApp group, for example, I think we pretty much exclusively play Games Workshop, actually. I guess we're just kind of fanboys at this point, rather than true, tabletop fans. We are more. I mean, we do also do other hobby things, I think. I mean, that's if I was to go back to something. When I was a little kid, I remember building airfix kits with my dad.
Okay.
That was like something. So he, for context, he was in the Navy, so on ships. So I would actually not see him sometimes for really quite long periods of time. And when he would come back, it was like a thing we did, that we would build kits together. We'd build a Spitfire or a Lancaster or whatever, and they're still up in my room at my parents' house, which is just the house where I grew up in. We still have all of the kits that we built together, and it's just a nice reminder of all the times that you had. But also, it was a really fun thing to do. It's the right level of fiddly. And appeals to the craft side of my brain. So if I was to go back to something, it would actually be that, or the model railway stuff, which my dad was a big model railway fan, and we had a set that we built together, and which were basically, now I look back on it, the gateway drugs to playing Warhammer, and spending lots of money on tiny amounts of plastic.
You were doomed from the start, in a way.
Pretty much. I'm surprised I never got Dad into playing Warhammer, actually. Perhaps I should have tried harder.
Yeah. So obviously it's clear that you're a lot more a fan of the skirmish style games, like you say. So has Warcry actually interested you at all?
I have to admit, I haven't learned anything about Warcry. I've just caught sort of whiffs here and there. So perhaps, well, for my benefit and perhaps people at home who don't know what it is, can you give me an intro?
Yeah. So the way that they described it upon release is it is what Warhammer Kill Team is to 40k. So it's the Sigmar. So it's
Mm.
basically a Age of Sigmar Kill Team in a way.
Yeah.
Um, However, it's important to note kind of it plays very differently. It's a similar theme. You have, a very small warband that obviously can lead to people creating a lot of, awesome, cool sculpts or cool paint jobs. Um, and you essentially duke it out against your opponent, um, and have to complete a certain mission. So something that's quite unique to Warcry, which makes it stand out a lot from Kill Team, is the fact that it's all randomly generated.
Oh.
So you have your 1,000 point warband force, and at the start of the game, you divide it into three separate battle groups: your shield, your hammer, and your dagger. And there's obviously various restrictions on how big each one has to be, etc.
Mm.
And then the whole by the starter set, you have everything you need. It's a very self-contained game. So where Kill Team came with a lot of, each box would have some terrain with it, and obviously the starter box came packed with terrain.
Mm.
Warcry and all of the Warzone expansions all come with the terrain you need to play it. And so first you draw from the terrain deck, and it shows you this is exactly how you set up the terrain. Then you draw from the deployment deck, which shows you how each player is deploying their shield, hammer, and dagger. And then this is the interesting part. Then you draw the victory condition. So you've gone into the game not knowing how you're going to win. So, there may yet to be a meta to figure out, oh, you always want to put these sort of units in your shield, these sort of units in your dagger, etc. But up until that point, you don't know how you want to lay out your forces. Because a lot of the missions will, certainly for matched play at least, or pitched battles, I believe they're called, um, it is based on one of you's attacker, one of you's defender. You need to kill the opponent's hammer, for example.
Right.
Otherwise,
Okay.
at the end of 4 rounds, if the hammer's not dead, your opponent wins. And so you've gone into it, you know, maybe you've put all your squishy units in your hammer because you want your hammer to be faster moving, but not necessarily tanking all the hits. And so this, I think, helps mitigate and balance the game in a lot of ways where people aren't going, oh, I'm just going to put all my, 30, 40 wound models in my hammer because you're never going to be able to kill my hammer, which means I'm guaranteed to win.
Mm.
So it helps make the game always feel quite winnable. And then finally, to top all this randomness off, you also draw from the twist deck, which adds a unique spin to all your games. So sometimes they seem to be like split into various groups. So there's several events where there are roaming wild beasts that appear on the battlefield that players can attempt to control. There are ones where there'll be really adverse weather conditions, such as torrential rainfall or the wrath of Nurgle. Or there's also psychological effects. So, for example, a lot of what the game runs off is you have all your individual fighters, but where a lot of the meat of the game comes from is abilities, and each faction has access to a set number of abilities, and then also the universal abilities. And these twists can prevent certain abilities from being used. Like one of the ones that I've noticed is it prevents you from using the ability Respite, which is the only way currently, outside of faction-specific ways, to actually heal up your models. So
Okay.
it's a very
There's a lot of
unique game.
RNG. Yeah, that's.
There's a lot of RNG, but at the same time, that's what I thought basically. When all the announcements were coming out, when I was watching all these content creators with their preview copies talk about the game, I was like, am I gonna like this game? Because it's based off RNG.
Hmm.
So to use the abilities, you roll 6 dice at the start of your turn and divide them into doubles, triples, quads, and singles. And each ability costs, say, a double or a quad or a triple to use. So I was like, there's RNG in that aspect. And then I wasn't quite sure what the RNG was going to be like on the game itself. But upon like reading through the cards, I was like, okay, this seems like a lot of chance is going to be what results in it.
Hmm.
But I've probably now played 10 games of Warcry, and each game's been different. Each like the people that I've played them with have all touched on it never feels unwinnable. Like they've not hit a point where they're like I can't win here. Like sometimes happens in 40k
Mm.
where your big powerful units get shot off in the first turn, and then you're like, well, what do I do here? So it's very, I think it's one you very much want to experience and see, is it your cup of tea? A bit like with Kill Team, some people might not necessarily be sure about the smaller scale skirmish side of things.
I mean, the thing that I've always liked about the small scale games, I suppose, is the fact that so much of the gameplay can be determined by RNG. I know that in the current 8th out of 40k, you can have, for example, objectives that are worth varying amounts of points each turn, depending on like the roll of the dice, right? That kind of RNG. Or you can have certain global events or whatever, but they kind of they force you, I think, to be more tactical on a smaller scale. The smaller scale means that they will have a bigger effect. So the fact that there's so much random generation, I actually really like the sound of like that, because no one wants to play the same game over and over and over again. Because often you will be playing with your same army against the same army, because you might only know one other person that plays, which is like almost all of the kill team that I've played. Probably about 2/3 of it actually has been against the same guy playing Tau. Having the different missions, the different mission templates makes life so much more interesting for that. So anything that extends the lifespan of a limited palette, if you like, of armies and players and terrain, I'm a big fan of. So that does sound really interesting, actually. And it shares the same models with Sigmar, I assume.
Yes, yeah. So is good way to start a Sigmar army is obviously, unlike Kill Team, you can't play every faction, because Sigmar, they seem to be a lot more focused on the lore. So a big chunk of the core rulebook that you get is actually filled with the campaign section, much like you can do campaigns in Kill Team. And it essentially justifies this is why this warband is here, because it's set on the realm of chaos. So you're not just going to have every faction there. Whereas Kill Team, obviously, you can pick any 40k army, and you have rules for them, and you can play them. So I think I would recommend you look into it. I mean, it's a very fun game, I'd have to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, didn't really know anything about it before, but you've sold me. Your pitch has definitely sold me on having a look at it. So yeah, I definitely will.
Yeah, cool. So are there any other Kill Team armies that you are considering after you finished this lovely project of your Tyranids? Or are you very much going to stick with them in terms of Kill Team?
Well, so the Kill Team I've been using has been the same. I feel like I've stumbled on quite an optimized build completely by accident, which is 3 warriors, one of whom has a venom cannon, 2 Hormagaunts, and a Lictor. Like it's small, but it gets the job done. So in a way, I'm kind of like, I can put that on a shelf and be like, yeah, I've got that for sure. When I was reading through the rulebook the other day, because up until now I've been using a PDF on my phone, and it's not the same as having a physical book. I don't know what it is, but I think it's just having the physical artwork in front of you. It's very different.
Yeah.
And I was looking, I was like, I've been meaning to get some Primaris from my old Space Marine army just to update them a bit, and I was like, that's an excuse. I could get some intercessors and maybe a squad of Hellblasters. But then I also was looking at Grey Knights, because I've always liked Grey Knights. I've always liked the lore behind them, but like I amp up everything about them so that they're just like draped in purity seals, so that they are actually like this crack team that gets dropped down rather than like a full army. I wouldn't want to collect a full army of them, partly because they have the baby carrying Dread Knights, but like having a small force of them and really stylize them, and actually really I'd like to do them in non-metallic metals, which is a technique I've never done before. I've got a few test models that would be good to try it out on, but I feel like that would be a really nice way, like a nice project to do like 5, because I think you would have 5 models done in NMM, cover them in purity seals, and like you see in some of the artwork, and just that's it. I'm not going to make a whole army. That's going to be like a project. Maybe that, or the classic one is also Guard. Like I played against my friend who was playing Vostroyans, and it just looked awesome. and it really, it really suits the vibe of Kill Team. That it's this like you give names to all of these guys and they acquire personalities. My warriors don't really have, personalities that you can assign to them. It's like, oh, they're all stabby killy machines who really like eating things. Whereas someone, like if you have your sniper from your kill team who makes a couple of kills, so suddenly that is a personality because it's a person. So like that appeals, having like a human aspect to it. But I think Grey Knights will be the next one that I try.
Okay, yeah. So that's something I very much enjoy about these small skirmish games, especially Kill Team, is the whole humanity added to it. It's not, I'm not using a squad of 10 faceless space marines. I'm using a squad of 5 marines that I've, done individual things with, because unlike in the large scale game, you're going to notice all your opponent's models. You're going to look at them and go, oh, he's got a cool paint scheme on that, or oh, he's modeled that on, rather than, oh, that's a squad of 10 space marines. They all look the same.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on a orc kill team.
Ah, fun.
For, I believe, a possible campaign coming up in my society, and it's quite a lot of work. I've set quite a lofty goal because I've never really done any kit bashing before or any green stuffing before, and I've decided, having had some inspiration from an orc army a friend bought on eBay a while ago, where several of them were painted up as clowns, and I was like, that's a very fitting thing for orcs. So I'm currently working on Da Insane Clown Posse, and I've currently green stuffed clown shoes onto all of them, and I'm working on like clowning up the weapons.
Amazing.
And I'm figuring out how to, change the bodies a bit more, but the faces are all going to have clown noses and clown wigs.
See, I saw, like, because I love having armies like that, and it's perfect for skirmish games where you can inject. You could just have a mad idea and just be like, yeah, why not? Let's do like 10 models like this. I saw, and I can't remember where I found it. It was on Instagram somewhere. I think it was the Golden Demon Compendium. This guy had done a squat, so like a really old model, in 80s vaporwave style. So he had like neon on the base, like kind of like a grid, like you'd see in the memes, and he had non-metallic metal but like ultra chrome style on his like bolt gun, and he was like decked out in these neon colors, and I was like, I want to do a kill team of orcs all like that, like vaporwave, like 80s retro orcs, and they all have sunglasses with like that blue tan color gradient where it looks like you're looking out at the desert. I want that. So that is a project that tempts me. Something like that for sure.
That's one of the things I love about the orcs, is just kind of, you can go wacky with them and people aren't going to question it, because that's what they're like in universe. They're just, they would do these random things or latch onto these random things because that's what orcs do.
Yeah.
Whereas if you come in with space marines painted up like clowns, you're going to be like, well, that wouldn't work in the setting, because space marines wouldn't have the emotions, I guess.
Yeah, that's not how, that is not how
the chapter wouldn't be respected if they were, space clown colors.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, and it's like, the orcs are just are the most fun faction. There's just so much that you can do with them. I think, Imperial Guard are kind of the same in that they almost have infinite customizability. But like, orcs, there is that. I don't think there's a single other army that you could do clowns apart from Chaos. If somebody wants to do like a bunch of clowns from It or something like that, like horror movie clowns, and you can make them cornate and give them like gigantic hammers and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
That's tell you what, if you're
like the Joker sort of aesthetic.
If you're there, you go. If you're listening to this and you want an aesthetic for your Chaos Force, you can have that for free.
That's also something. They're very. It's one of the things I like about the Sigmar setting is orcs are very similar in that respect as well. Like one of my favorite pieces of lore to do with the orcs and Sigmar is not only much like orcs in 40k, where they pick up random pieces of scrap and leather and strap it to themselves for armor. The Iron Jaws actually kind of take the metal from their enemy's armor and they just flat out punch it onto their bodies or punch it onto their mounts to give them the armored protection. And then also, they very much share the brain capacity of orcs, where the weird knob shamans, who knows how they work? They just get overcome with the power of Gorkamork and the War.
Mm.
But then you have the war bosses, and the way they actually organize themselves in Age of Sigmar is um, they're organized. A big group is known as a brawl, and a brawl is made up of several fists. And the whole lore basically behind it is, eventually a orc brute comes along, who he wins enough battles, and he gets smart enough, and figures out, hang on a minute, if I take my hand and turn it into a fist, and figures out, oh, and then they realize, hang on a minute, if I take my other hand and make it another fist, we have a brawl. And there's even the note in the lore, which is kind of, who knows what's going to happen when an orc figures out he can use his toes as well. And then my favorite uniform, though, has also got to be Ard boys. So these are the kind of rank and file orcs of the army. But the best thing about them is how different they are. They're actually made fun of in the orc culture, because what they like to do is have kind of uniform armor, and they like to march around in formations in like proper rank and file and have a command structure and stuff.
Oh,
Like
yeah,
the Yumis do, and all the other orcs are just kind of like, what are you doing? Like, it's ridiculous.
Weirdos. They're disciplined and stuff like that. Yeah, I remember reading that. Yeah, yeah, like they have. I have to admit, like, I would love to collect them. It is basically the expense that puts me off doing a full army of orcs.
Yeah, because they're a horde army.
Yeah, and I've already committed to doing gaunts as a horde. So like,
yeah,
but I am but a humble YouTuber. I cannot afford. I mean, I'm also not someone like Lewis Brindley from the Yogscast, who could just buy a whole army and he probably wouldn't make a dent in his finances for the month. I was like recording.
Oh yeah, business expense.
I was recording. That's the thing. I have actually been, when I've been playing games on stream. So I bought BattleTech and I've bought Minecraft actually, because I played it before it became like I had to buy it again. That's all business expenses and stuff. So possibly if I do start doing content about Warhammer, I could technically classify it as a business expense. But my new mantra is, just because something is a bad business decision doesn't mean it's not a business decision. So I could justify it, but like, I was recording at Yog Studios because they have done a lot of content around Warhammer. They did the Battle Boy series, tabletop gaming,
with their in games night as well.
Yeah, and I'd love for them to return to that. They basically said that they haven't been able to work out a format that is engaging enough. But they've still got all of this stuff around. And I was recording in a room and I looked back and there was about probably £400-500 worth of Necrons just in boxes behind me, as in like unassembled. I was like, what is all this doing here? Very tempted just to sort of make off with a few boxes, but I was like, no, I'm not gonna. I'm not, much as they can afford it. I'm not gonna do that.
Actually, funnily enough, so a lot of the Yogscast, I know certainly Lewis, get their miniatures commission painted, because obviously very busy schedules, not having the time to kind of sit down and paint their models. I'm actually friends with the person who does all their commission work for them, and who's also commissioned the like high roll. She painted up all the high roller models as well.
Oh, she's awesome.
She's
I've seen the models.
I'm hoping to get her on at some point, but she was originally employed at my local games workshop, and that's kind of how we got to know each other.
Oh, that's amazing.
We've stayed in contact through the years, and it's been interesting to say the least that she's kind of ended up not only a commission painter, but painting for the Yogscast of all people.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting profession. Like, I think it's one of these things where I would say that I'd like to do it, and I'd probably do it for 6 hours, and then decide that I absolutely hate it, because like, it's as soon as you make a hobby into a career, it stops being fun. It's something that I've kind of had with YouTube, because I used to do YouTube in my spare time as basically a way of staying sane in the PhD, and having like an artistic project I could vent in some way. But then when it becomes your hobby, it's not your hobby anymore, it becomes your career. Yeah, I have had a little bit of disillusionment with it, but not really, which is what tells me like I'm probably doing the right thing in my life to be doing something that I still genuinely enjoy. But I feel like painting presumably an awful lot of hours each day, because you can't charge too much for commission services, or no one's going to buy it. To make it worth your while, like, that's a lot of painting you've got to do all the time. I mean, how many commissions does she do? Is she always booked up?
Yes, so her commissions are always officially closed, more or less. I know. So she actually kind of the way she ended up in this spot. Obviously, she'll probably tell it herself on here at some point if I can get her to come on. She actually essentially got promoted up the Games Workshop ranks and became one of their studio painters over in Nottingham. And then obviously she left that and became commission painter, and clearly to kind of resounding success. Of she's always on stream painting stuff. I know she used to do a lot of army, like full army commissions, but she's going to be stepping away from that now because she has recently ended up getting what is essentially her dream job in as a community manager for a reasonably large video game company.
Oh wow!
So she's going to be doing a lot of single pieces now rather than 10 Space Marines or 20 Necrons or whatever.
Oh, awesome! Like doing something like that, we can really lavish attention, and the projects don't take, because if you're doing like a squad of 10 or 20, that's a lot of time to put into one project. You're going to get bored by the end of that, especially if you have no emotional connection to the end result. Like, I don't mind doing a squad of 20 Hormagaunts because I'm like, well, they're mine, I'm going to use these afterwards. But doing 20 things for somebody you don't know, that's going to be tough. So like doing hero models for promotion work, that's a really cool job. Actually, that's made me jealous now. Thanks for that.
No problem. Maybe if you focus on painting. Who needs physics? Who needs a YouTube career? Who needs Twitch? Just paint models every day. I'm sure you could find a way to survive.
Well,
and then
I'm a pretty good painter, but like I don't think I'm good enough to do it professionally. I need a fair bit of practice there.
So I think we're probably coming to a good point to kind of round this all up. So I've got one final question that I think would be kind of a good way to end this lovely little chat. So obviously, like you say, you've done a lot of content creation over the years. You've dipped in and out of the hobby, but having done all sorts of content creation, you've been a part of kind of all sorts of communities and all sorts of circles. What would you say is kind of unique and your favorite thing about kind of hobby in general, or like the Warhammer community, or kind of this group of people that will come together and play tabletop games?
I think the hobby, my favorite thing about the hobby is that it is somehow both innately social. I play it with friends, and it's a wonderful way to get to know new people. Like I was playing with a guy who when I was at the Bad Moon Cafe, actually I was playing with a friend, and somebody he knew came over, and we played a 3-way game. It's a fantastic way with a shared grammar and vocabulary of the rules of the game and the factions and the memes around it, to get to know a new person who has something in common with you. It's both intensely social but also profoundly meditative. When you're painting, it's quiet time. So somehow the hobby to me is both the time when I'm, extroverted and I get to meet people and talk to people and all that kind of stuff, but also the time that is for me and me alone, when I just put like a podcast on and paint for a couple of hours in the evening. So it kind of covers all parts of that social spectrum, which I just find incredibly wholesome, I suppose. I like how it involves people and it doesn't.
Yeah, I very much agree. I found it's a very nice community, and it's a very different kind of community. Like you compare it with the very popular nowadays video game communities, for example. You can find, certainly due to the nature of on the internet and stuff, you get a lot of toxicity, or you get a lot of resentment and anger and just a lot of negativity in these sorts of spheres, depending on what kind of people you end up attracting and how well you're able to moderate the community. Whereas when it comes to going down to your local gaming cafe, you're rarely going to come across a person that you're going to have a disagreement with, in the respect of they're not going to come over and start insulting you. You're going to have a little chat, then maybe you get to know each other, then maybe you end up playing a game together sometime. And it kind of, maybe it's the whole because you're meeting person to person rather than screen to screen. But it's very much a very, like you say, wholesome and kind of welcoming and inclusive community.
It is, and I there is a slightly darker side to the games. I basically mean 40k here specifically, actually, which is, I think there is, because the thing about 40k is it's profoundly satirical. It is all of these horrible things in the world ramped up to 11, and all of these things which like rampant genocide and xenophobia and like an incredibly authoritarian system of government. And there is, I think, the vast majority of people do come to the hobby because they realize it's satire, and it's in a way kind of, I don't know, I suppose it's just kind of fun to consider a scenario that you would never ever politically consider in the real world. But then there's also a kind of person who comes to it and seems to kind of unironically think that it's a good idea. And you'll see it on online forums. There is definitely kind of an underbelly to 40k, which is quite right-wing authoritarian. And I agree with you that it's very much a welcoming community, and, especially if you go into the stores in person, it's wonderful to meet these people. But there is that kind of, slight rot at the heart of it all, which does that is the one thing about it that does concern me by being associated with it, because you kind of then think, well, I think I know all the people that I play with are good, decent people, but I think some of these people might be Nazis. I don't think any of my friends are actually Nazis, but it's when you meet people for the first time, there is just that like 5%, probably less than that, hopefully, chance. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but it's definitely, especially in person, a wonderfully wholesome community.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I think that's a kind of brilliant note to end on. So
slight risk of Nazis. Sorry. Let's focus on the good stuff. Focus on the good stuff.
Focus on the good stuff. And thank you once again for coming along. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I'd love talking about this stuff, and thank you for inviting me.
No problem. I mean, I'm sure we'll probably end up doing some more stuff in the future.
Hopefully, yes.
Maybe the odd battle here or there, or future podcasts.
Absolutely, yeah. Need to start assembling all the 40k geeks of the world together, or now some Warcry potentially. You may have convinced me.
Yeah. I'm sure if you pop down to your local GW, they'll be more than happy to give you a demo game and sell you everything.
Yeah, that's when the danger starts. Because when does Rent come out again? I think it's right. Okay, it's like 3 weeks, maybe. Yeah. I'll have to go in and ask.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to the first Graduate Gamer podcast. I'd once again like to thank Dr. Simon Clark for agreeing to come on. It was an absolute delight to have him. If you want to see more of this kind of content, along with news, battle reports, narrative campaigns, and all other sorts of hobby goodness, make sure to drop a like on the video and hit that subscribe button. Also, be sure to leave a comment down below letting me know who you think I should have on next time as a guest. Until next time.